And the second bell is when you're really late. So, Ryan, we're going to have you in the back. You're going to hand out pink slips to everybody.
I was going to sing that song, You Can Ring My Bell.
Oh my goodness. I remember that song. You can ring my bell. All right, folks, come on in. I have enough pink slips. This is good, though. We will. Because everybody's in trouble, aren't they? Peg. Darn right. All right, come on in. It's a good day, but a hard day. Wonderful. All right. How's my volume in the back, Travis Benfield? It's good? All right. Not too much, not too little. Excellent. Come on in. Good, good. Spence, would you open us up in prayer? Thank you.
Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you for this time we get to spend together, thinking through how to deal with the world today and fruit. I pray that you would bless this time and bless Mr. Lund and instruction of this text and help us absorb some of it and use it in our lives. And thank you so much for that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. That's a wonderful prayer. How do we deal with today? Which is what we're really about, isn't it? We're not here to learn philosophy necessarily, other than how it impacts us here today. We're not here to learn about how the other people out there in the world are all screwed up. What we're here to do is learn how to love all that are around us, that are out there, subject to a lot of these different philosophies they don't even know that they're subject to. Like we said, we don't anticipate meeting many people on the street corner that are deep in Descartes and have changed their life because of Descartes, or deep in Freud because they've decided Freud is the end-all be-all. What we really encounter are people that are basically subject to a patchwork of ideas that have become a social imaginary. We've talked about this. The social imaginary is kind of the air that we breathe. It's the regulatory, it's the laws, but it's also the cultural. It's also the religious in big quotation marks. And it's the larger conversation that we're all a part of. And that conversation in the United States has certain rules and norms that we're aware of. You go to a different country, it's going to be a different social imaginary. The westernized world has a social imaginary that's much more similar than the Eastern world, or the Asiatic world, or the Middle Eastern world. But it's still in all, it's a kind of a patchwork of ideas. And what Truman has done for us, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm back. I think I'm just going to patch in and out. Descartes. I know we skipped a week last week, and that's fine. Descartes in the 1600s. I think, therefore I am, and then he's tracing it forward to today. So now we're at Freud. Freud died in 1939. So now we're the farthest down the timeline that we've been, and we're going to talk about Freud in kind of a high-level way and how he contributed to our social imaginary, our patchwork of ideas. In your outline, you have the two primary movers that we've covered so far, Marx, and then the last time we were together, we covered Nietzsche. So you're starting to see a pattern here. We've covered Descartes, we've covered Rousseau and Hegel, but what they are is underpinning for these two big lampposts, and we're about to add the third lamppost, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud. And really, when you see them in this table, we could add, after this class, we could add Freud to another column. We're tracing, I can't say theology because they don't believe in God. We're tracing an ology, we're tracing a body of thought that these guys have contributed to the world, largely the Western world, and how their thoughts have had ramifications down the road. Now, in our table, we see here, both with Marx and Nietzsche, they start that there is no God. There's just man. So then, without God, Is there a higher purpose? And their answer is no. Man has no meaning and there is no higher purpose. So with no higher purpose, these men are looking around and they're saying, you know, men still exist in community. Why is that? Why would that be? Because community restricts. And we've got all work together in order to survive, which immediately plops us into a political context. With Nietzsche, it's the weak over the strong. Somehow the weak have to be part of society, so they have to manipulate the strong. And they come up with ways to do that, relative. It keeps you away from the pain that you're suffering. And the answer that they're all looking for, believe it or not, is fulfillment. That's in the bottom of your table. And we're going to talk today extensively about the concept of happiness. Now, later on in the book, there's an entire chapter, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. But we're going to define today what happiness meant back then versus what we consider happiness today as more of an emotion. Happiness from the time of Aristotle and even preceding Aristotle has had a much deeper, much broader meaning. It's an ultimate happiness. It's a fulfillment. It's a happiness born in contentment, being part of something larger than yourself and having meaning. So we'll talk about that as well. So you have these men, Marx and Nietzsche, trying to say, yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you mean by under the breakthrough society, you have both as circular, but when we talked before, Nietzsche's, I didn't see his theories as being circular because they kind of exploded at the end.
Yeah. So what he said was, what do you mean by this being circular under here as far as the breakthrough in society? So both men agree, and Freud would agree as well, we're about to see, that it's society that puts the boundaries on men. But it's also the society that puts the boundaries on men that keep men from happiness, from breakthrough happiness, that ultimate fulfillment. So in Marx's construct, the idea is that you have to have a revolution against society because it's society that's keeping man from the fruits of their labor. And we went through that analysis. With Nietzsche, society is what is constricting man and putting boundaries on man, and so man must continually break free. Now the reason why that's circular is because you continue to break free, but you have to find something to break free from. So then you end up with a culture of breaking free, and pretty soon everybody's looking for something to knock down. And then we talked about how conservatism was the new cool. And we read that clip from that article about, oh, you want to be radical, you want to be wild, you want to be outside the box? Be conservative. Which brought it all back around, right? Because you have to construct a society in order to be able to tear down a society. So even that is circular. Now Freud answers this question in a different way, which we'll go through, but you're going to see the same things. They all start with there is no God. They all start with there is no purpose and meaning, which is a natural outflow of there not being a God. But then they all have to deal with the fact that we live in community. Why? And so we'll see Freud's answers today. But again, we get into these bad answers. So if you were, and we're going to look at this in more detail as we go. So I'll go ahead and get us started on that. But you want to talk about Freud here. Quick thoughts. He's starting in the exact same place as Marx and Nietzsche. There is no God, man has no meaning, and religion is largely disregarded. He calls it infantile. He calls religion infantile. But he is concerned with human happiness. And remember, each one of these things has this kind of utopistic, is that a word? Utopian perspective. How do we solve for happiness? Real happiness. The happiness that's in our Constitution, that concept of happiness. So let's go to page 72. And let's read the second paragraph on there. Mitch, can I pick on you? Stand up nice and loud. And the paragraph I want you to read is the second paragraph under Sigmund Freud and Human Happiness. It begins, first, the notion that sex is foundational. Yes, please. Nice and loud.
Starting with the single most important.
Starting with first, the notion that sex is foundational.
essential to the notion of human nature. Indeed, it is a vital part of what it means to be human.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So what we're talking about here, and Peggy, could I ask you to look up Psalm 1, verses 1 and 2, and be ready to read that for me? Psalm 1, verses 1 and 2. So this paragraph really sets it up for the larger conversation. We're going to go deeper into Freud here in a minute. But here Truman is overarching. He says Aristotle saw happiness as embodied in a life lived according to virtue. So in your notes, you've got a table. And this is a classical study. This is the study of ethics, basically what is right and what is wrong. The problem is, and this is what Aristotle was wrestling with all the way back in the day, and this is pre-Christ. He did not believe in God or an ultimate God. What he was wrestling with was what is right and what is wrong when there's no divine authority. How do you determine what's right and what's wrong? And Aristotle's model was, well, if you live according to these virtues, then you will have a virtuous life, and you'll enjoy that. And that will be virtuous unto yourself. And you'll have fulfillment. The original is like eudaimonia. I put it in there, but I don't know if I pronounced it right. But you'll have this ultimate happiness, this fulfillment, by living virtuously. So the virtues that Aristotle talked about were primarily prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. And by living that way, you would live a fulfilled life. And then the society at large would be prudent, would be temperate, then there would be justice, and there would be courage. There would be this fortitude. Now that's pre-Christ from a non-Christian perspective. But it's called virtue ethics. That's like the overarching name of this. The idea is if the virtues are right and you live according to the virtues, you will be fulfilled and have happiness. That's the overarching idea. Now, we progressed beyond that. Now, he jumps to the Declaration of Independence. I'll jump one back. Augustine took a whack at this and added 3 more virtues: faith, hope, and love. And then the contention is that you can't live any of these virtues unless you're Christian. And so within the Christian church, for thousands of years, well, 1,000+ years, we studied the virtues in the context of being a Christian and how to live our lives for Christ virtuously, courageously, with justice, righteousness, prudence, wisdom, in faith, hope, and love, like we were exhorted to today. But it was seen in the context of living our lives for God. So that this type of an ethics, this type of determining what is right and wrong, is rooted in a deistic figure. That's why you have on there deontology. Remember, ology is just to study up. So in the world, in the secular world, they would say, oh, the Muslims, oh, the whatevers, the Buddhists, the whatever. Whatever your God is, you live your life according to this higher divine figure, and you live that life, and then that's what gives you fulfillment, that ultimate end, that ultimate higher purpose. So it's a God perspective of ethics, something beyond us, above us. So the third one is what we're going to get into today with Freud. It's a consequential ethics. And we'll study that here in a minute, so I won't define it. But it's a whole nother category of ethics. A whole nother category. Now, we're going to get deeper into this in chapter 8 or 9. I can't remember which one. I think it's 8. Where the chapter is literally life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But you think about Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. He says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And then he mentions God. And then he says, all men have the right to pursue or to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But he's claiming a God-given or divine ordained right for man. None of these 3 men would buy into that because none of them buy into God. Man, therefore, has no indelible rights. It's only what they can claim. So we're chopping God off the top of the head here. We're literally starting with the shoulders and down and trying to live a life. That's where these men are, and that's why they get so far off. But that's the perspective. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 1 and 2. Because what we have here, so we've got virtue ethics, which is not necessarily with God. You can go ahead and stand up, Peggy, sorry. Virtue ethics, not necessarily with God. But then we've got this idea of God-centered ethics. But then, which God? Which God? So when you think about the people of Israel coming out of Egypt, God says to them, I am the Lord your God that brought you out of Egypt. Me. I put that in there. Me. I put you out of Egypt, pulled you out of Egypt. Therefore you shall have what? No other gods before me. Were there a lot of gods around? You betcha. They'd just come out of Egypt. There were heaps of gods there. They were about to go into the promised land. There were heaps of gods there. And the big accusation against Israel, when God comes in and sentences them basically to being taken away captive by Babylon, he says, Jerusalem, you have a God on every street corner. And they did. So God says, I am the God that brought you out of the land of Egypt, and you will have no other gods but me. And then he gives 9 other commandments. But the first one is the most important one, you could argue, because if you're dealing with a different God, you're not even on the same playing field. So who is this God, right? But when we think about happiness, this is the picture God gives us of fulfillment and deep and rich happiness. Nice and loud. Sorry, I kept talking while you were standing there. That's my fault. You go right ahead. Yeah.
Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. But those who delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night.
One more verse. Sorry. Go ahead and read 3.
That person is like a tree planted by the springs of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whoever they do prospers.
Perfect. Have a seat. That's wonderful. So you've got this metaphor, this image. Remember all the way back to when I was talking about how to read Scripture, right? The metaphor. But you've got this poetry. But you've got this wonderful tree. But the tree is rooted in the ground around it. It's part of the larger whole. The tree is rooted next to the river that feeds it. The tree is firmly rooted, and it gives its leaf, and it gives fruit in its season, when it's the right time. Not all the time, but in its time. There's a flow, there's a purpose, there's a belonging, and there's a wonderful comfort. You get this wonderful image of solidity, of strength, of belonging, and meaning. That's happiness. That's the happiness of the Constitution, we're pretty sure. But it's also the happiness that's promised in the Bible. That's what God is talking about when he says, you shall have no other gods before me. Meditate in my law, and this is what you'll be like. These men, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, are looking for that. But they're looking for it without God. And they're trying to find it and make it work of themselves. Marx was looking for a utopian vision, and he had his solution. Nietzsche, looking for a utopian vision, had his solution. There are political parties around the world promising a utopian vision. Utopian promise. That's their vision. None of them can fulfill this. Only God can fulfill that vision. So when we have Freud here in front of us, we have to remember in our heads that he's another dog chasing a tail. He's another man without the real answer, but he's trying to explain what's around him without God in front of him. All right? So let's start to dig in about how he does this. Let's read page 73. Robert, could I ask you to read 70? Don't have a book? Can one magically appear? There it is. Page 73. I love this class. It's like they just come flying at you. You could end up with 3 all at once, and you have to watch your ear. All right, stand up, Robert, nice and loud, right here on page 73. Now, while Freud abandons all the way down to so seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Now, while Freud abandons the notion that human nature is having an intrinsic moral structure, he does believe that human beings still share something in common. Here he builds on a long-standing enlightenment position of seeing pleasure and pain essential for thinking about good and evil, happiness and the lack thereof. Quote, what do people demand of life and wish to achieve in it? The answers to this can hardly be in doubt. They strive after happiness. They won't become happy to remain so. This endeavor has 2 sides, a positive and a negative aim. It aims on the one hand at an absence of pain and unpleasure, and on the other at the experience of strong feelings of pleasure. So seeking pleasure and avoiding pain are key to the definition of happiness. And where is the greatest pleasure to be found? Freud is in no doubt.
Thank you. That's perfect. So Freud goes straight to sex. He said that's the answer. That's the fulfillment. So he's got his way about it. So if you look at Marx, the core sin of Marx that this feeds might be jealousy and envy. Jealousy and envy under Marx, because you're looking around and you're saying, the fruit of my labor is in the hands of another. I should have what they have, or they shouldn't have what they have because that was taken from me. And that's a core sin that Marx and Marxism kind of caters to. Then you've got Nietzsche. And there's a core sin there too. It's rebellion. It's an absolute rebellion against all authority. And now you've got Freud. And it's sexual sin. He's recognizing that sinful impulse, and he's saying that's the key to all of society. That's what drives all of us. And then he makes some interesting observations, too, that are wrong. But I want to address his quote there. What do people demand of life and wish to achieve of it? The answer to this can hardly be in doubt. They strive after happiness. There's a positive and negative aim. What he's talking about there is consequences. At a material level, it's like a little child, and he comes up and he touches a hot oven and he goes, ouch! Okay, well, I guess I won't do that anymore. And so if you put that in an ethical model, you say, oh, it's wrong to touch a hot stove. Why? Well, because it burns my hands. Makes sense. But that's at a very pragmatic or consequential level. But what you have here with Freud is a definition of consequential ethics. Do whatever makes you happy. Does that sound familiar? Don't do anything that doesn't make you happy. Does that sound familiar? Furthermore, if anyone is causing you to do something you don't feel happy about doing, they're the oppressor. They're the problem. They're the one. So you see where this is already coming to fruition here, and has done all throughout our conversation. But this idea of consequential ethics, and by saying consequential ethics, instead of saying, oh, you know, pastor preached a sermon today and it made me feel sad and I didn't like it. And then the ethics part, I turn around and I say, it was wrong of him to preach that message. Why? Because it made me unhappy. It threatened my happiness, my ultimate happiness. So instead of just saying, oh, his message made me happy and then walking away, I turn to him and I say, no, you are a problem. Because by saying things like that, you're making people unhappy and you're restricting them. And so you're wrong, ethically speaking, if consequences are the root of your ethics. Yes, sir.
If pursuing one's own happiness is the merit, that defines what is ethical, what if my happiness is
Yes. So the statement, it's not even a question, is, well, if pursuing my happiness is the ultimate ethical perspective here, what happens when my happiness intersects with somebody else's happiness? Yeah. Yeah. There is no answer for that, which is kind of the problem, isn't it? See that quite a bit. Yes, Sarah?
It's just like saying every man did what was right in his own eyes.
Yeah. It's kind of the theme of Book of Judges, isn't it? Yeah, which is why they kept saying, we need a king. What they were meaning is, we need somebody to tell us what's right and wrong and to enforce what's right and wrong to get some order back in this place. Looking beyond God, of course. They were looking, not beyond God, not looking at God. They were looking at some earthly authority. Yes, absolutely. Can I get you to read for us? All right, 74. Starting at the top of the page, just start with the first sentence there. Freud, human nature is at its deepest level, and then go all the way down till Freud, morality and civilization. Stop there. Do you see it?
So that is halfway through. Start on the page before with that sentence.
Sure. And then stop at the stop right there.
Oh, like read the whole thing.
Yes, read the whole page, nice and loud for everybody.
Bottom of page 73. This is a
Yes.
very important point. It's the fundamental form of human happiness is the genital pleasure derived from sex. Then we can conclude that for Freud, human nature is at its deepest level sexual, and that human beings are therefore defined in a basic way by their sexual desires. And we add to this that Freud also saw sexual desire as existing from infancy.
Pause there. Did you catch that one? So Freud says the primary driver in all of society and mankind is sex, and it starts from infancy. Well, you were born that way. Which way? Well, whatever way. But you were born that way. Truman makes a point earlier in the book. He says, you know, sexual activity used to be something that you did. It was an act. Now it's who you are. Because I was born that way. And Freud introduced that with a bunch of dressy pseudoscientific lingo and some papers, etc., and the world started to just adopt that. Remember, we're in the 1920s into the 1930s now with these concepts as he goes forward. Go right ahead.
When we add to this that Freud also saw sexual desire as existing from infancy, the point is further reinforced. Our identities as human beings are in a very important sense fundamentally defined by our sexual desires. It is difficult to overestimate the importance of this move to make sexual desire central to human identity. In modern society, everything from the common use of terms such as straight and gay in everyday conversations, the underlying assumptions of international human rights law presuppose that this is the case. And the idea that human flourishing is virtually synonymous with sexual fulfillment is commonplace.
So human flourishing, just insert happiness, as we've been discussing it, fulfillment, happiness, belonging, stability, all that. Go ahead.
The idea that human flourishing is virtually synonymous with sexual fulfillment is commonplace, in fact, virtually an intuition.
There's that word again, an intuition. So now this is part of our social imaginary. We just intuitively think, because it's broadcast to us all the time, we intuitively think, oh, well, you know, this is just who I am. Go ahead.
In virtually an intuition of modern Western culture, the fulfilled life is a sexually fulfilled life. That is the unmistakable message projected from a myriad of commercial, sitcoms, soap operas, and movies. Pornography is big business and of massive economic significance. Sex counseling is a booming industry. Drugs designed to preserve the libido into old age are now a basic part of healthcare. Modern culture's portrayal of traditional sexual standards, virginity, chastity, modesty, even monogamy, is typically engineered to present these values as somehow inadequate, even oppressive and dehumanizing. And Freud is the man who originally expressed this understanding of human happiness in a cogent, plausible, scientific form. As the abolition of the pre-political makes us all Marxists now, so the assumption that sex is happiness makes us all Freudians.
Thank you. So we're all Freudians now. Notice, too, that the messaging comes through all of these different channels, And it's multi-tiered messaging. Here's where your fulfillment is. Here are the bad and wicked things that are keeping you from your fulfillment. It's all across the board. And it's delivered to us in comedy. It's delivered to us in metaphor and imagery. It's delivered to us in drama. It's delivered to us in scientific papers. It's delivered to us through the medical community, the psychological community, through regulations, through law. It just keeps coming in at us in all these different ways. This is bad, this is good, which is ethical. This is right, this is wrong, this is bad, this is good. That's ethics. But where this is coming from is the idea, well, I'm happy when I do this, and I'm really sad when I do this. And if you keep me from doing this is what makes me happy, you're the oppressor. You're dehumanizing me because I was born this way, whatever it is. So that's where Freud is going. Now, you guys have all been great about pointing out the flaws in these thought patterns. And of course, there's a huge flaw here. Huge flaw. So let's go on to that. Page 77. Page 77. So let's start with, let's see. Ryan, could I get you to read for us? 77. Start with the quote there. Primitive man was better off, and then go down to the end of that paragraph that's right after it. You see where I'm at? Yeah. So quote down to there.
Primitive man was better off in knowing no restrictions of instincts. Counterbalance this is prospects of enjoying this happiness for any length of time, very slender. Civilized man has exchanged a portion of his possibility of happiness for a portion of security. This passage is worth connecting to the earlier ideas of Rousseau that we examined in Chapter 2. For Rousseau, human beings are most authentic when connected with the inner voice of nature. That is what makes them empathetic and promotes true morality. Polite society, with its conventions, its rivalries, and its petty jealousies, is what corrupts. Only a return to that inner voice can truly make men and women authentically moral.
So pause there. So we've linked it back. We see this idea. Oh, we're back to primitive man. That's the man that was the happiest man. No society, no boundaries, no restrictions, no law, no rules, no regulations. That was the happiness man. What was that? No taxes. So the boundary, the pain is coming from society, right? But what if this is really coming from a sexual impulse at the very beginning? Go ahead and keep reading.
But what if Freud is right? What if the inner voice of nature is not one that leads to empathy for other human beings, but is rather a powerful sex drive that seeks sexual gratification? If that is the case, then allowing that inner voice to find outward expression will lead to a very different scenario, one that is dark and violent. In short, such a world would be one of social chaos, dominated by the most physically powerful males, for whom everybody else will simply be an instrumental object for the achievement of sexual pleasure.
Perfect. Thank you. That's the problem. That's the problem. Yes, sir.
It's really interesting that they keep drawing this distinction between natural world, like primitive, but they negate animals aren't having sex for sexual gratification, they're having sex for procreation. And so it's like they're delinking the two. It's like, no, it's not for procreation, it's for my own personal gratification.
Yeah.
It's natural. It's like,
Yeah. And this is the conundrum that they find themselves in. I mean, we in our lives, we live, what is man's chief end? Go ahead. Glorify God and what? Happiness. Our happiness is in glorifying God, which is the totality of everything that He commands of us. It's not just the Ten Commandments, but it's how you work out the Ten Commandments in your life with love and all those things to be right with you. So you've got this command. What is man's chief end? Which is an old word for purpose. His telos, his final end, his meaning. What is man's chief highest meaning or end or purpose or goal? What was the reason he's here in the first place? Is what that question is asking. To glorify God, glorify means to reveal him in all of his splendor, to show all of his attributes. To glorify God, the God, and to enjoy him. So there's your happiness. To be in relationship with him, to be a part of his plan, to contribute to others, to love him as we love others, like we heard today, to enjoy him forever, which takes into our minds the concept that this life is not all there is, that we're meant to be eternal. How much does that change your life when you think about the idea of there being a heaven and a hell and a God and a Savior that needs to take you through to heaven because you can't get there on your own, and there's an eternity out there, and you're going to spend it in one of two places? That is an entire worldview-changing reality in that one question and answer. Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking, in other words, basically, make God happy and make ourselves happy. So like that's deeper and more meaningful happiness.
Yes. Very good. So this is what they're trying to do. This is what the first question of the catechism says. God, man, it's all in there, right? What they're doing is they're saying, okay, there is no God, and it's just us. But how do we reconcile that, and how do we live? Is there a right and wrong? There has to be. Why do people want to be together? I don't know, but they are, so we got to explain it. So they're looking around and they're trying to solve this conundrum without God in the answer. And that's why they're ending up in all these different places. They're recognizing some of our largest societal impulses from the sin side. They're the strongest sin sides. So jealousy and envy. That's the Marxist side. You've got Nietzsche with rebellion. I just want out. It's the rebellion side. And now you've got Freud with the sexual impulse side. And they're trying to say, well, that's it. That's the answer. That's what drives all of mankind, that one thing. And then they build a worldview or a philosophical understanding on it. But what we get 100 years later, 200 years later, is little quips. Oh, God is dead. Oh, so that means there is no God. Or we get, I think, therefore I am. Oh, that means that I decide. Or we get the idea of, well, I was born this way. And if you make me unhappy, then that's wrong. It's not an action you've taken. It is ethically wrong. You see all these little bits and pieces, and they kind of become the fabric, and then we're fed it over and over. All right, so let's keep going with this, because now we've identified this idea of what's wrong. So what is civilization and morality as far as Freud is concerned? Neil, could I ask you to read that for us? At 77. To avoid this, society engages in a trade-off. Do that.
Most fulfilled if I read sitting down.
Neil said, as long as you understand, I'm most fulfilled when I read sitting down. And I'm going to make him unhappy now. So I'm wrong. Go ahead, Neil. Nice and loud. Yes, please. And then go on to the next page. Yeah, I'll stop you. Oh, sorry. To avoid this. Remember, when we left off the story, only the strongest man was going to be the guy. Everybody else was going to be a victim, right? So then we have to avoid this. Go ahead. This is what he's trying to avoid.
To avoid this, society engages in a trade-off and places restrictions on sexual desire through cultivating morality, a code of behavior by which guilt and shame about certain sexual behaviors are internalized. By so doing, this allows human beings to live together in some kind of social arrangement. This is what Freud calls civilization, but what we might also call culture. Sexual instincts are curbed, thwarted, and redirected so that men and women can live together with some degree of security.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil. Did you guys hear that? So in order for this dark doomsday scenario not to take place, society had to create something fictitious called morality. But it's really based on survival. So it incorporates Nietzschean ideas of the weak, those that would be the victims, having power over the strong, right? But it also incorporates this idea of just how does this society work? Because it does. And that's what they're trying to explain. So let's keep going. Travis, do you have a book? Wonderful. Go ahead and stand up.
This is where Freud's view.
Oh, let's go down one more. The drawback to civilization should be.
The drawback to civilization should be obvious at this point, given that it requires the frustration of natural sexual instincts. This means that there is a level of discontentment that then marks human existence. True happiness becomes unattainable precisely because the avenue to it, a sexual free-for-all, is precluded. Hence the title of Freud's monograph, Civilization and Discontents.
So pause there. Do you see the flaw then that Freud is dealing with? Oh, true happiness is an ultimate sexual gratification. But that can only come if that happens. But then only the strongest guy is going to do that. Everybody else will be a victim. So we have to invent society to prevent that from happening, which means nobody can be happy. And I'm going to write a book about it, and I'm going to call it Civilization and Its Discontents. That's an awesome worldview. Yes? Yikes!
So when I was reading this section, a thought occurred to me. When did this start, and how on earth did they get? Like, does Nietzsche? I have not read any of this. Does he have like a? At this point, the strongmen realized their strength and were somehow benevolent and gave up the power to the weak people because at some point the strongmen had to agree to this, which makes no sense. I'm just trying to think, like, does he have any kind of explanation for this? At some point, the strongmen went, oh, yeah, you know what, we can't allow for these weaker people to, and we'll all be unhappy, because it doesn't make sense for how he's just saying the weak manipulated the strong. Like, that makes no sense. If there is no God and all this stuff, the strong would be like, no, I'm not taking this, I'm strong, you're weak, what are you going to do?
Right.
Does he have any kind of explanation for how this mysteriously evolved manipulation came about?
So the short version of that is, does he have an explanation for how this came about? Is that fair? Okay. Does he have an explanation? Now, by the way, I know you're still standing. Thank you for doing that. You're making me happy by, so thank you.
Are you happy, Travis?
He says, does Nietzsche, well, we could say, does Marx, does Nietzsche, does anybody have any explanation for how this all came about? And largely the answer is no. What's that?
It was in his own mind.
It was in his own mind.
He had to come to grips with what he saw the world about him.
Yes.
And in his own thinking, man to man, he came to this conclusion.
Yes.
There's no rational reasoning behind it other than his own concepts that he rationalized in his own mind, bringing it about.
Yeah.
It has no true origin.
Because what Tim is saying, do you have something real quick? Yes. Your arm's hurt? Okay.
I just wanted, I think it was Alfred Adler, who was a student of Freud. I think he's the one who said that. When somebody asked him about Freud, he said, they said, you know where Freud got all that, don't you? He made it up.
Well, and that's exactly right. The quote was, you know how Freud got all that, don't you? He made it up. And that's essentially right, because again, these men are trying to explain the world by erasing God like I just did. They're looking around and they're trying to explain what already is. To go ahead and talk about how it became that way would involve what? A creation story. And that's a problem. Go ahead, Travis, and finish our paragraph there.
And for Freud, this is where cultural pursuits, art, music, sports, religion, etc., come into play.
Okay, listen to this. Listen to this. So the idea that sexual drive is the core of all society. And listen to where he goes with this. Go ahead.
They are ways of redirecting that sexual energy into activities that bring some satisfaction, even if it is not as great as that which untrammeled sex would provide. And it is this tension, this conflict between human desire and needs of civilization that is the point at which sex enters the political consciousness.
Thank you. So basically, every other activity in society other than sex is nothing more than an outlet for frustrated sexual desires. Art, music, religion, entertainments, sculpting, jogging, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, if it's not the one thing, then it's a substitute for the one thing. And that's where he's going. I see your hand. Let me read just a little bit more and then we'll get there. All right, page 78, paragraphs 2 and 3. Wait, I just read that. We just read that. So the idea of civilization. This is Freud's view of civilization. They're civilized out of survival. And every bit of civilization, all of the activities of civilization, except for the one thing, is just a substitute, some kind of a release point for the one thing. And his view was, too, that society, by definition, could not obtain happiness. So unlike Marx, who said society would achieve a utopia eventually after multiple revolutions, and the workers would be reunited with their gains, unlike Nietzsche, who said eventually everyone will be free, and then there's a utopia, Freud makes the determination that society can never obtain happiness. Somebody had their hand up. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
One thing that just struck me is it seems like this is a totally monolithic view of everybody to think that everyone thinks this is the one thing and that everyone thinks the same thing about that one thing.
Yes.
Men and women, young and old, whatever.
Yes.
Totally seems to be
Yeah.
generalization and just lack of understanding of the whole concept of struggle.
So what Dwayne is saying is that this seems like a very monolithic view of all of society, that everybody is wired the exact same way because they're all being driven by this one thing. And that's exactly right. And that's for all three of them. Keep in mind, though, that the true model is monolithic. We are, all of us, created in the image of God. And there are only two categories of people, those that are in rebellion against God, or those that have been saved by Jesus Christ through his Son. By God, through God's, you know what I mean, right? That's it. But every single human being created in God's image that's ever been or ever will be, all human beings are required to obey God, and then God has saved some, and then there are some that God has not saved, and that they have been in rebellion to him. That's a very monolithic view. But it's true. And we see that almost, and this is where the glorifying God and the error of all the stuff that we see around us. How does all of this glorify God? How does Freud, how does Nietzsche, how does Marx, how does Hegel, how does all of these things, how does this glorify God? What's that? It doesn't in and of itself. But what does God say about man without God? What? He'll be foolish. He'll be wicked. He'll be in rebellion. He'll do insane things. And is that not what we see? We see a man, we see man as a whole, seeking to live lives outside of God, away from God, in rebellion against God, and they will adopt or accept almost anything. Well, I say almost. They'll accept anything in the name of whatever. So we're seeing it play out to its fruition, to the logical extremes and conclusions. We're listening to the root ideas, right? We're still not even in the 1990s yet, or whatever. But we're looking at the extremes that we're seeing today, which is basically the outflow of these rooted philosophies. And we're seeing, literally an emperor with no clothes. And everybody going, oh. But that glorifies God, because that is exactly what God said we would be like and how we would act and what we would experience without him. Which is why he keeps calling us back unto himself. And it's why mankind without God, who was created by God for God's glory, can't live right. Head's all messed up. All right, so let's go to our last piece, and this will set us up for next week. Let's go to page 80 and the middle paragraph. Mr. Zappone, could I ask you to read that for us? Yes. Let's just, go ahead and just read this whole paragraph to here, degrees of discontentment. Now, this is the lead-in to William Reich, who gets us out into the 60s and 70s, but we're going to cover that next week along with somebody else. Go ahead.
On the surface, Marx and Freud are not obvious bedfellows. Marx has an optimistic view of human society. Yes, the revolution will be painful, but ultimately human beings will be able to live in a non-alienated condition once the workers own the means of production. For Freud, however, our inner dark world of violent sexual desire means that there can never be a utopia, only societies with varying degrees of discontent.
Perfect. Thank you. So the idea there, by the way, did anybody think of Marx as a optimist?
I don't think his countrymen would.
Definitely not. But in a sense he was, because he thought it was even possible. And what Freud wrote in his work, Civilization and Its Discontents, is he's saying, no, it's not even possible. He was more right than Marx was. Anybody that's pointing to a utopian vision outside of God is wrong. And we know that. But what we see here is the setup that'll keep going forward. So Freud, his methodologies, the deep psychoanalysis, a lot of this sexual stuff, all of it has been debunked by the scientific community, not just by Christians, but it's been debunked as it's not really real or rooted. But we still have those key little thoughts, those key little ideas that are, again, forming this social imaginary that we live by. But we'll go ahead and leave it there, and next week we'll be in the second half of chapter 4. Second half of chapter 4. Jesse, could you close us in prayer, please?